Now, indeed, you're very welcome to the edition of What Matters programme. Now, today, my guest is well-known Jimmy Deenihan, former TD, school teacher, and also an athletic man of the past and the present of the Kerry football team. So, Jimmy, it's great to be with you here in the beautiful surroundings of the Kerry Writers Museum. What more could you ask for?
Yeah. Well, thank you, John, and thank you also for taking on this subject.
Yes.
Which is something very important, obviously, for Ireland. But
yes,
this particular DVD that I produced is very focused here on the stone in North Kerry.
Yes.
But it's a microcosm of what happened in the rest of the country.
Now, they were dreadful times, as we all know. Our own mother and fathers, our grandfathers, if we knew them, grandmothers, they grew up in that era where it was, terrible strife, the independence, striving for an independent nation. And, hundreds of years prior to that. But what made you focus in on this particular aspect of Irish history, Jimmy?
Well, I have, I suppose, produced a number of documentaries on North Kerry writers, on
yes.
Kerry football, on the River Feel. So I have an interest in doing documentaries. Then I was Minister for Commemorations from 2011 to 2014.
Yes.
And previous to that, actually, I was spokesperson on defence in Dáil Éireann. So I was on the Commemorations Committee going back to 2008.
Yes.
So the preparation for the decade of commemorations of centenaries started well before 2016. So I developed an interest there in doing something on the War of Independence in North Kerry. And also I had a whole family connection with it. My uncle was very much involved in the local company in Famine, for example.
Yes.
He got a medal, he was recognised for that. My aunt was in Cumann. So I suppose that period in history was often referred to.
Yeah.
When I was growing up in my house by my father, he was too young to be involved. He was going to St. Michael's College that time, but he had a really deep and genuine interest in that period of our history. So in the DVD, I've looked at what happened in North Kerry from the introduction of the Home Rule Bill in March of 1912 up to the truce in July of 1921. So
yes.
it traces the history of the whole nationalistic movement over that period of time. And also it shows about setting up the volunteers here in North Kerry and how they were influenced at the time, or the movement was influenced by Michael O'Reilly,
yes.
who really was one of the most important figures in Ireland from 1913 up to his death in 1916. And he was one of the bravest of the 1916 leaders. There's no doubt about that. He sacrificed his life to clear a way for the garrison in the GPO
yes.
to move to a safer place. And he was the one that volunteered to do that. And he faced a barricade that was manned by submachine guns, for example, by the British Army. So he was very brave, and it deals with that, setting up the volunteers, what O'Reilly did, the whole, I suppose, landing guns at Holt, that
yes.
he paid for mostly himself. And also there was that West Limerick connection too, Spring Rice, obviously, in bringing in the guns with Molly Childers. There's a very good photograph of both of them in the DVD. And then following 1916 and the North Kerry involvement in that, obviously there was no action during the rising because O'Reilly went around, came to Limerick and
yes.
had a countermanding order issued by Owen MacNeill that there'd be no rising on Easter Sunday.
That's right, yes.
Yes. So then he went back to Dublin then, and Desmond Fitzgerald, Garrett's father, who was a very close friend of his, called to the house that day O'Reilly wasn't well actually, and he was in bed, and Desmond called to the house and said, "They're going to be a rising," and that was on Easter Monday. And O'Reilly got out of bed, put on his uniform, and as he said himself, "I helped to wind the clock, now I want to hear it strike."
Yes.
So he drove his beautiful motor car, and there were very few of them around that time, into Liberty Hall. When he arrived, they were all lining up to march to the GPO, and there was a huge cheer when O'Reilly arrived. It lifted the whole audience there. And he took some of the guns in his car up to GPO, and actually acted as a barricade afterwards, his car. And it's now under Hill 16 probably, because that's where a lot of the rubble went to build Hill 16 after the rising. So then after the rising, then it traced, I suppose, the history of the volunteers down here in Kerry, and their reorganisation, and then their evolution into being the IRA when the government was set up, the Dáil was set up in January 1919. Then the Irish Volunteers then became the Irish Republican Army, because it was the army of Dáil that declared the Irish Republic at that time. So it traces everything that happened in North Kerry from there to the truce. But then when it came to January of 1921, I got relatives to tell the story.
Great, yes.
So this story is told by relatives, nieces, nephews, grandnieces, grandnephews. And they tell the story of what they heard in their families, what was handed down to them through the generations. In some cases, only one generation. So it's quite interesting. It's very moving, actually.
I was just going to ask,
quite emotional.
The emotional, yes, the aspect of it.
And then it deals with, for example, the killing here, the beating of John Lawler. He was a clerical student. He came back from All Hallows, where he was a student, and he was going to confession, and he was accosted by a patrol of Black and Tans and RIC on the main street, in Market Street actually, and he was badly beaten up. When they heard that he was David Lawler's son, who was the sacristan here in the local church, then they beat him up with the butts of their rifles, and they beat him so badly that he died the following day. But the reason why they singled him out was because his father refused to toll the bell to mark Armistice Day.
Ah, right, okay.
And also it was said that he refused to toll the bell on at the funeral of Black and Tan, who was either killed or died in the locality at that time. But for whatever reason anyway, he's badly beaten up and he died the following day. So it tells that story. His niece Margaret Lawler tells that story very well, and Father Gahan, who's a local
Father Anthony, yes, I met him.
Then it then deals with the death of a man called Jeremiah Galvin. He was the man that created actually the Maid of Éireann, that wonderful piece of stucco work at the Maid of Éireann, and the British Army took out a number of people to fill the trenches around the Stone. The local companies, they created trenches obviously to make it difficult for the RIC stroke Black and Tans auxiliaries to go out the country on patrols. So they took out a number of people from the Stole, and they made them fill the trenches. But in the process, this man, Jeremiah Galvin, who had a heart condition, he died. He got a heart attack. So it deals with that. Then the big one after that really was the burning of Ballylongford, and two RIC people were ambushed in Ballylongford infirmary, and one of them died and the other one died afterwards, and as a result the Black and Tans and RIC under Tobias O'Sullivan, actually, the district inspector, went to Ballylongford the following day and burned 20 buildings in the town.
In Ballylongford,
yes. It was called the burning of Ballylongford. There was no one killed in it, but the town was substantially destroyed. Now, there were a number of thatched houses in the town, so obviously when one of them was, I suppose, lit, the whole lot went off, the fire spread. So, and it included McCabe's bakery, and the McCabe's, they were very lucky to escape. They were lucky to have a skylight in the roof, or they would have been all burned because they were all upstairs. Now, whether the Black and Tans realised that or not, but there were other children staying in the house at night as well.
Yes.
So that was John McCabe. He was Jerry McCabe's father, who was shot afterwards.
Oh yes, in Adair. Yes, Jerry McCabe. Yes.
So that was the.
That was good. Would you agree?
So then,
yeah, sure.
After that, then Tobias O'Sullivan was a marked man, the district inspector. Now, he had taken part in the defence of Kilmallock Barrack, which was a famous incident in the War of Independence in Limerick. And they held the barrack anyway, and the IRA withdrew. And for that, then he was promoted. And that's why he came to Listowel as district inspector. So it led in the way to his death afterwards. And so he was a marked man. He was a very good policeman, took his job very seriously, too seriously probably. So he's a marked man, and GHQ in Dublin General Headquarters sent a directive to Listowel to have this man taken out. So the three individuals that again were assigned the task of shooting D.I. O'Sullivan were from my van. They were from the my van company, the Newtown Sands company, and Conbraston, a man called Jackie Hearn, and a man called Donny O'Grady. So they came into the store, and the DVD tells all the story. Yes. They came into a pub now, which is the Star and Garter. They waited there. They had all the reconnaissance done beforehand. They knew that the D.I. Sullivan would leave the barrack at a certain time of the day, just after 1 o'clock. And so they waited for him. They had a scout going up at the other side of the street, and he walked along parallel to D.I. Sullivan. So when they saw him, he was a man called Jack Sheehan, who was later killed actually. Then they come out and they shot D.I. Sullivan. And he was within yards of his own house, and apparently his wife saw him on the ground, and it was pretty gruesome. So then the three escaped, but then 4 people were arrested, and 2 of them were sentenced to be executed. And one of them was Jack O'Linehan. And coincidentally, Jack O'Linehan is the grandfather of Donald Linehan.
Oh, Donald, yes, who was here at the launch.
Who was a famous rugby player.
Yes. Yeah.
And he was sentenced to death, and but for the truce, he was going to be shot on the Monday after the truce. And he had his own grave actually dug next to Thomas Kent's. Yeah. So the truce saved him. If there hadn't been a truce, there'd have been no Donald Linehan. So then the DVD deals with the incident at Guttaglana, where 3 unarmed volunteers were again accosted by a Black and Tan RIC patrol. They were heading towards Ate. Whether they knew they were on the road or not, no one knows. These 3 individuals, they went to Ate to warn the local flying column down in West Limerick that the RIC and the Black and Tans were going to do a search in Ate at the mission.
Yes.
So they went to Ate to the mission, and on their way back they were unfortunately accosted by a patrol of 3 lorries of black and tans, RIC, on the road. There were 4 of them, and 3 of them were shot, and 1 of them escaped, a man called Condi. And in the firing squad, the person who was directly opposite him hesitated, and he ran, and he got away and lived to tell the story. But the other 3 were all shot: Paddy Doughton, Paddy Welch, and Jory Lyons.
Is that where the song is about the Dalton brothers?
Yeah. And we were able to get then, on the very day that it happened, we got members of their family to be at the location, and it was a very poignant moment.
I can imagine.
It was during COVID times, we couldn't have a large gathering there, but we got grandnieces, grandnephews to be there at that particular time. So that's all included in the DVD. Then after Gotradana, you had the incident at Kilmorna House, and that was the shooting and the burning of Kilmorna House, and the shooting of Arthur Vickers. And Arthur Vickers was sometimes described as the careless keeper of the crown jewels. But he came to Kerry after he lost his job as the chief herald, came to Kerry in disgrace in that sense, but became very popular in Kilmorna. It was owned by his sister, the house, and all the stories in the DVD. And then the British Army and the Black and Tans were using the house as a place to go to. They used to fish in the rivers right on the bank of the field, and also obviously he had good facilities out there too. They probably were not here in the store. So they went out to him on a regular basis, and obviously then the local IRA felt that he was given information to the authorities.
I see, yes.
So he was warned, and unfortunately they continued to go out there. The week before he was shot and the house burned, there was a group of patrol of, again, army, I'd say it was mostly army, that went out to his house, and on the way back they were ambushed by the flying column under a man called Mick Purtle, whose son Liam became a councillor afterwards. But during the ambush, it was on their way back from Kilmorna.
Yes.
There was a man called Paddy Gallivan shot dead. And I suppose that was another reason then why the local flying column felt that there should be some retribution. And because of Vickers' connection with the authorities,
yes,
he was, I suppose, singled out. And anyway, he was shot dead, and Kilmorna House was burned. Then, not too long after that, then Jack Sheehan, who was one of the firing party that shot him apparently, he returned to his home. It was in Kyleby. There's now a memorial out there, and again, unfortunately for him, he returned to see his family, but also to meet his girlfriend, who later became a nun actually. But Jack,
yes,
a patrol of Black and Tans, came on the scene. He ran across the bog, and he was shot by an army marksman who was at a distance of about maybe it's disputed I suppose, but 600 yards.
Wow.
So it was shot, and he was shot anyway. There's a memorial up in Mournelock Bog to mark the spot where he was found. So then, after that, then there were a few different events, but the last, one of the last major events here was the shooting of James Kane. And James Kane was a former RIC man, and then he became a fishery inspector. and he was again singled out, and orders given, a direction given to have him shot, because a representative from the RIC came to North Kerry to carry out an investigation into the shooting of D.I. Sullivan, and they took some evidence from people in Listowel, and on his way back to Cork he was ambushed and the evidence was found, and there was incriminating evidence against James Kane. Right. So James Kane was a fishery inspector, so they were waiting for him. They say it was the Finu company were waiting for him, and they arrested him, and he was taken to a house in my van. Then again, Con Brosnan and Donny O'Grady, and Jackie Hurton, they were called upon, plus Dennis Quill here in Listowel and his brother, just a small number of people, that he was in a house in my van. They brought him from there. They brought a priest to him, and it tells the whole story.
Wow, yeah.
And anyway, he wanted to be executed in a place where he'd be found quick, because he had a young family. So then, commenting on that is Donny O'Grady's actually grandnephew, Paddy Corden. Then Dennis Quill, who was there, his grandson, Brian Quill, and also Fergal Keane, who did a documentary on it actually for BBC, yes, on that whole shooting of James Keane, and Father Gahan. And Father Gahan's family were very close to his family. They were very friendly with each other. Mm-hmm. So they speak about it and about the traumatic effect it had on the family itself, the Kane family, and also people like the Gahans, who were quite close to him and who were a nationalistic family, but at the same time, obviously, they would have a lot of empathy with the Kane family. Yes. They were living quite near them. So then the last incident then was, the last shots that were fired here in Kerry anyway, were on the Saturday evening, and the truce came into being on the Sunday, were in Tarbert. And the My Van company, who were probably the most active here in North Kerry, they targeted Farnlow, the Black and Tan, who shot Jack Sheehan. So they went to my van, they had information, they had intelligence to say that he was drinking in a pub in Tarbert. And so they went to Tarbert. Jackie Hurton and Con Brosnan went ahead, left a number of their colleagues behind just to see what was happening. They got the information, they were in the pub. Con Brosnan went back to get the rest of the squad. In the meantime, they came out, they left the pub early, and Jackie Hurton was on his own, and Jackie Hurton actually fired at them, wounding two of them, didn't kill any of them. But this man Farnlow, he was boasting around in local bars and all the rest about how he shot Jack Sheehan. So that's the end of it, really. And yes. There's a kind of an overview then done on it by Declan Downey, local historian.
Oh, Declan, yes, I know him.
So
yes,
basically, the DVD from January of 1921 to the truce in July, it's basically, the story is told by relatives of those directly involved here in North Kerry, and also by local historians. Mm-hmm. So it's quite interesting. Just
listening to you there, I mean, it is sad, it's tragic,
but it's history.
It's history. It happened.
It happened.
And the people that you have talking to were handed down the stories, the reports.
The important thing is,
yes.
For example, Barry O'Sullivan, who was the grandnephew of D.I. O'Sullivan, he came down and he did a tremendous interview about the background of D.I. Sullivan, Irish speaking, from Connemara, very nationalistic.
Yes, yeah.
But different interpretations of
course,
that nationalism was. A very good policeman, and also a great grandniece of Arthur Vickers, a girl called Eva Pocock. She came down she was interviewed as well, and came for the opening as well that evening.
Marvellous, yeah. And the one thing is though that struck me, I'm going back now on the films there that were made of Michael Collins, the Wind That Shakes the Barley, and all of those. There was, and there had to be, a ruthlessness by the flying columns, by the personnel of the various brigades around rural Ireland, North Kerry, West Limerick. There had to be.
There are no boundaries in
yes.
warfare. Yeah. So that is the lesson to be learned from it. And Condi, the man that escaped, he went to America. He took the anti-treaty side in the Civil War. Then he went to America in about 1925, went to Chicago, and did quite well there. But he did an interview with the New York Telegraph in the 1960s, and he said that he dreamt and thought about his colleagues in Guatemala every day of his life, and that his wish was that Irishmen would never shoot each other again.
Yeah. Thank you indeed, Jimmy, and we wish you the very best of luck with it as well.
Thank you, John.
Okay, go to meal, Mark.